Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for making it to this. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I think we have most people here. Um, just took a minute to get the Zoom actually started, which reinforces the value of having these in person because we're not reliant on some of those things. So thanks for your patience. I'm gonna start the June 18th, 2026 meeting of the Connecticut Data Analysis and Technology Advisory Board. Thank you to everybody for making it to the meeting. We're going to begin with, I'm going to do the roll call and then some introductions. We'll try and go through some of the first bits of this in an expedited fashion. We've got, I believe, one new member, and so I'll do the roll call, and if folks can do a quick introduction to who you are for our new member, who, while I'm talking, I'm going to scroll through and see if is on the call here. And I actually don't see him. Let's see, but he said he was going to be here. Well, we'll do the roll call. Oh, there we are. I'm at. Okay. We'll do the roll call. If you can say who you are, a little more detail than normal, then it will help. New member get introduced. So we'll start under the two members appointed under Representative Ritter. We had Seth Klaskin, who I think everybody knows was on the board since the inception, and today I believe is beginning his work as a probate judge, so he is rolling off the board, and we thanked Seth for his service last time, and I hope folks continue to extend that gratitude to him for a lot of time put into this work. Thad Demkowski is the other member appointed through Representative Ritter. Thad, are you here? No Thad. Okay. Through Senator Looney, who I think we'll need to redo the appointments when Senator Looney rolls off. Michelle Reardon-Nold and Adler Coffey. Michelle, you're here. I see you. And introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, everyone. Michelle Reardon-Nold. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Data Collaborative.
And is Adler here? No. Okay. Our one other appointed member is Bree Berner through Rep. Candelaro's office. She said she cannot make it today. Apologies also to everybody for scheduling this the day before a long weekend. I didn't have the foresight about that earlier in the year. So Bree is not here, and that is all of the appointed members. We're going to go through the ex officio members, beginning with Dave Labadia from the Department of Administrative Services. Dave?
Yeah, David Labadia, Director of Architecture and Strategy, DAS BETS.
Thank you. And through the Freedom of Information Commission, Colleen Murphy is also rolling off, and I think either at or approaching retirement, and Nick Smara is here, and I believe you're the designee for FOIC.
Hello, Nick Smara here.
Do you just want to introduce yourself and your role a little for our new member, too?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm a staff attorney with the Freedom of Information Commission. When Colleen was the executive director, she asked me to fill in on some of these meetings, and that ask has been carried over from the new executive director, Danielle McGee. So I'm just generally a member at the Freedom of Information Commission as a hearing officer and just a like I said, staff attorney, so I represent the commission in court as well. But we also do education and training, and so it's not all bad.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Also, you have a little bit of echo on your audio, so we'll come back later. I think in some of the discussions, I just want to flag that. Through the Office of the Attorney General, John Newman, you here?
Hi, good morning, John Newman, Assistant Attorney General. Sorry, I'm getting bad feedback as well.
Great, thank you. Through the Chief Court Administrator, Joe Grealish.
Hi, Scott. Joe Grealish, the Director of Performance Management and Statistics for the branch, and we put out basically the numbers for the branch. Thank you.
Thank you. And our State Librarian, Deborah Schonder, cannot make it today, but I believe Elise Marzik is here from the State Library for one of our early items. Elise, are you here, and do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Elise Marzik, Records Management Specialist in the Office of Public Records at the State Library. I'm here for Deborah, who could not make it today.
Thank you. Through the State Treasurer, Christopher Regan, are you here?
Morning, Chris Regan, IT Director, here on behalf of Treasurer Russell.
Great. And then through the Secretary of the State's office, our new member, Matt Parent. Actually, I realize I don't know how to say your last name, but do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little more who you are?
Sure. Yeah, Matt Parent is fine. We've de-Frenched it for the American audience for a while now. Yeah, I'm a PhD political scientist. I got my degree at the University of Connecticut. I'm coming to us recently, as of a couple of months ago. I was at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. I teach political science coursework at a couple places as an adjunct, but my new full-time role is with the Secretary of the State as her, I believe the title is Elections Database Specialist, but it seems to be kind of ad hoc political scientist for a lot of the back-end work that requires data analysis. And I'm working predominantly or near exclusively with LEAD, the elections team, and still learning a lot. So super excited to be here. And I've had the fortune to meet a couple of you actually already. So I look forward to meeting others as time goes on.
Thank you for agreeing to serve, and it will be great to hear more from you in the future. Last two, through the Comptroller's office, Michelle Parlos, you're here.
Good morning. Yep, I'm Michelle Parlos. I'm the economist at the Office of the State Comptroller, and I also the agency data officer and manage the Open Connecticut transparency tools. I'm serving on behalf of Comptroller Scanlon.
All right, thank you. And then our Geographic Information Officer for the state, Alfredo Herrera, who is on the call. Great.
Yep. Hi, I'm Alfredo Herrera. I'm the Geographic Information Officer for the state. I work with Scott at OPM.
Great. Thanks. And I'm Scott Gall. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Office of Policy Management. Let us begin today's meeting. Again, thank you everybody for the patience at the beginning. I'm going to go in an expedited fashion through some of these items. Just as a refresher, one of the roles of the board is assisting in the advising on the development and implementation of the state data plan. So we have goals in our state data plan that are here. And on the next slides, there's 6 goals. This plan covers 2025 and 26. So later in the meeting, we'll talk about anticipating the next 2-year cycle and the time frame for beginning that, which will start this summer, basically after this meeting. So we've got 6 goals. We're going to talk about some areas that we made progress in the past few months on 3 or 4 of these goals later in the meeting, but I just want to have that as an anchor for the discussion. I'm going to very quickly go through some of the legislative updates. So this is sometimes we've had this every year for the past few years to go through anything that relates to data, the work of the board that happened during the legislative session, make sure the board members are aware of that or can advise on implementation of anything that came through in the past few months. So I encourage board members, if there's something that we're not going to go through in the next couple of slides, please do bring it up. And if any of the members kind of advise on the direction to proceed in any of these, we'd certainly appreciate your guidance. I'll flag a few items here. These are kind of coming from things that have more direct impact on OPM and our work on data. So I'll go through these quickly. Through the special session last year with the Attorney General's office, really in the lead, worked on legislation that protects privacy for personal information related to people's address, school work hours, and so that legislation passed last year, but the guidance on it is going forward, and this board discussed that at our last meeting. There's more data on transparency to support transparency about legislatively directed funds, sort of colloquially known as earmarks, and so we'll get more reporting on that starting in 2028. We changed the name for our state longitudinal data system officially from P20Win to DataLink CT to reflect sort of the broader scope for that. In the GIS world, we changed the reporting deadline for parcels to make it a little easier for towns and councils of government to report that data. And there's some other areas in which GIS data may get used in the next few years to implement other policy changes. The other big change, and I will come back to this later, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it now, is 2 requirements related to basically getting the state's data ready to use or be used in AI solutions. So this is something that's happening quicker and quicker in the outside world, and we want to make sure that when the state's data gets used in different types of AI solutions, that it's done accurately, that there's sort of governance and controls around that, but that we're also making sure that we're providing the information that's needed to inform and develop sort of support innovation through the use of artificial intelligence. So we have a requirement through my role to identify data that could be useful for artificial intelligence systems that you can sort of read on the left, and then with all of the agencies and the agency data officers in particular, develop some of the policies to support the use of AI around data quality, data governance, privacy, and then publishing some of that data as open data. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail later, but I did want to flag that was one of the changes in the very sort of all-encompassing omnibus bill on AI that passed this session. It's the governor's proposal, and so we're working to begin the implementation of that. And again, the board, any advisement on that would be helpful. Again, paired with that, and again, this is a little beyond the scope of the board here, more requirements for the use of AI by executive branch agencies, just sort of reinforcing the guardrails, making sure that when we're using AI, it goes through a really rigorous process to review it, that we assess and understand the impact of those things and are transparent with the public about the use of AI. All right, that's the lightning round. Any other things from the legislative session any of the board members wanted to flag or advice on those topics as we proceed? I'm just looking for raised hands real quick. All right. Hearing nothing, seeing nothing, we're going to move on. So this is a discussion. The next item we're going to go through, I'll introduce a couple of terms, and then again, I think it helps to hear from some of the agencies involved in this that work on this a little more closely. We started this discussion at the last board meeting, and it got a little bit truncated, but looking at some of the terminology that people use and trying to identify where we've got sort of like a real definition in statute about some terms, and where there's something that people kind of refer to colloquially and use a term in common parlance that we want to make sure we've got an understanding of what the sort of more precise definition is, and then we can start laying some of those things out. We don't have a specific like this is the goal for this discussion or hard sort of deliverable that we're pushing towards. I think we want to make sure we've got figure out where there are questions or gaps in understanding, and then in probably some of the materials or things that we pull together for the next state data plan, identify where we need to build up a richer understanding about some of the terms that are used, so we can avoid potential pitfalls there. So I would think of this in the context of what do we need to do for the next 2-year state data plan to figure out where we can clarify some of the terminology that folks use as different parts of their work. So I'm going to go through some of the terms, and then again, I know some of the agencies here use these more actively in their day-to-day work, and we just want to make sure they're surfacing issues that they see day-to-day, and we can go through how to address those. So first term, most obviously, data. We have a definition, state statute for data. This is the definition that's used. It's basically, you can read this, obviously. It's in the same statutes that set up the chief data officer role and some of the duties for the development of state data plan and some of the relationship with this board. It basically describes data as things that are in a table. In this case, it's in the context of things that are maintained by executive branch agencies. That's the scope that we're looking looking at it and measures something that's related to the work of the agency. It's not, you know, the list of lunch options that somebody was looking at or something that somebody found on the internet. This is something that's related to the work of the agency and that you record basically in a table or some other similar format. So that's data. Oops, wrong direction. Sorry. Public data builds off of that, and we'll talk about open data in a minute. Is data that's collected and permitted to be available to the public after sort of reviewing the requisite guardrails and provisions around that. And so we're going to make sure we're specifically using and calling out the term public data because of the focus on transparency that we have, but that is where occasionally it will get confused with the term public record, which is different. And we'll go into in a second. And this is sort of what underlies both, as I understand it, the work that underpins the public's right to know through freedom of information and our record retention and record management requirements that both really rely on this definition of a public record. We'll talk about it in a second, but it's related to the work that government is doing, things that are recorded as part of the work of public agencies, not executive branch agencies, so the scope is broader, and it's recorded in a variety of different fashions. So the work that government is doing gets captured in public records, and then we have a set of requirements based on what's in a record. Other terms that come up, and these I don't think we're going to delve into today, given a variety of different considerations, but we have terms that get used in different settings, and we just had a discussion about 3 of these earlier this week: personally identifying information, or PII, confidential information as distinct from PII, personal data, and then personal information. So I believe, and maybe John could correct me, personal data is a term that's used in our data privacy laws for the consumer data privacy laws for the state, and personal information is used in some of the breach notification laws. Personally identifying information is used in a bunch of different places. And so these are terms that, again, people use kind of day-to-day operationally, and want to make sure we're as much as possible starting to track down like what the definition is, identifying if there's an area where something's not clear, and then providing some guidance or clarity where that seems like it could be an issue. So I will pause for a sec. I don't know, for some of the folks that work on this from the I know FYC, State Library, there's things that you want to add to this as to where we should be focusing our efforts.
Yeah, Nick Smarthack, I just jump in. Is my audio better now? I switched my headset.
It's a little better, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so really, I think that definition does a lot of work at 1-200. So when we're looking at public records of files, it actually incorporates the term data, but also says or information. So one thing I kind of want to get across is when we're talking about a public record of file, we're not talking about like a single whole document. We're talking about the information that's inside of it, and the information that's inside of it is what's exempt under the FOI Act. So that's why it's really important when you get a records request that you have to go through, and even if you think it's a broad category of exemption, that you still have to go through the entire record and make sure that there isn't any non-exempt information in there, and that's the important part. Also, one thing I just want to kind of, I mentioned this another time, but I think the discussion here is really around what happens with the information that is doing, for lack of a better term, work for the public agency, meaning that you get information about like statistics or something. And I think that actually that term data probably does a lot of helpful work as well. But like statistics or something that gets published, or any type of information that's being used by the public agency. So I think really, but kind of, that's certainly included in the FOI Act, but one thing I want to make sure that doesn't get lost is everything else that the public agency has. And what I mean by this is specifically communications. In all honesty, in my experience as a hearing officer with the FOIC, probably the biggest requests I see is for communications, and that's what is kind of being sought at most often. And one of the things that I'm hoping we can tackle with this board is how those communications are being maintained, and how they are like if personal, like come out right, I would say it like personal devices. and volatile messaging platforms, I think, are a couple big areas that I think certainly implicate the public record and files terminology. But just throwing that out there because I want to kind of highlight some of the nuance with kind of when we think about a record in common terms, it's a single item, but also it can mean a bunch of other different things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, and parts of those things as well. So hopefully some of that made sense. If it didn't, I'd be happy to answer questions, but that's really what I wanted to drive home, is not to leave out some of the other not, I guess, statistical or technical data aspects of the definition, but also when we're talking about all information that it's relating to the conduct of the public's business, and that's really broad. So, you know, I'm hoping whatever comes out of this discussion that we include all of those things, and we can really kind of address some of those larger issues that you know, I know the FOIC is facing, and hopefully work collaboratively so we can figure out how to get something that works best for everyone. So again, hopefully at least some portion of that made sense. But again, I think the definition largely speaks for itself. So I'll leave it there, but I want to touch upon that. But again, around for questions if you have it.
Great, thank you, Nick. I'm going to see if there's other hands, and then I know I had at least one question coming from this. Two things for folks to think about. So one, just because we, again, just talked about AI will be sort of constant topic of discussion in the future. A question that's come up in other settings is, so is AI generated content a public record? If we're putting prompts into some LLM or generative AI solution, is that public record? What if the AI generates the content, or that public record? I think so. We're entering uncharted territory when basically computers are generating a lot of the content, although I think that's not dissimilar from how folks use data day to day. The other question, and I'll ask Nick this maybe, and we'll see if we get comments, is the distinction between sort of data in a record. I know particularly the term public record creates occasionally concern from agencies, because it would include, as I understand it, you know, data that's collected from residents. Like we'll use the example of like a child welfare case, and so there's you know, someone has a case, they record people's names, case notes, other things like that, that would constitute a public record. It doesn't mean that the data in that is going to be made public, but it is part of the public's business. It's tracked by an agency, and so like I think that's where occasionally like the term comes up. It doesn't mean that that data is going to go and get published, but it does meet the definition of a public record.
Oh, 100%. And you know, there are different statutory exemptions outside of the FOI Act that the commission has to consider, and even public agencies have to consider as well. And you know, we talk about mandatory versus permissive exemptions. And when we look at the permissive exemptions, mostly speaking with some exceptions, those are the ones that are in 1-210B. So those are things like invasion of personal privacy, or preliminary drafts or notes, things like that. So whatever's in 1-210B, again, with some exceptions, I'm not going to muddy the water with that right now. But the other thing that we need to look at as well is 1-210A, which has, I think the language is like, except that's provided by other federal law, state statute. And that's really important, that actual phrasing of the language, because it specifically says state statute. So regulations wouldn't apply, policies wouldn't apply, it's state statute. That's different at the federal level, obviously, because there are other concerns there. But so when looking at those other statutes, those are probably the things that are really gonna drive people a little bit more to be a little bit more cautious with disclosure, I'd say, because at that point we're looking at things like you know, FERPA or something like that. But I think actually FERPA is a great example, because even with FERPA, you would have to withhold things, but you can't withhold everything. You have to go in and do redactions, for lack of a better term. But yeah, and kind of going with the, that was actually one of the other things. You mentioned the AI and what's being generated. And so it's, the key part of it is conducting the public's business. So if I know a lot of us have Copilot through the state. And if we're using that to generate something and we're doing that on part of the public's business and it's recorded, because that's the other main part, is it has to be recorded. And so I don't know if you save your chats or whatever, but at a high level, that would seem to qualify. Although I can't make an official statement on behalf of the commission. I'm just one guy, but I think that kind of answers that question. And going back, but that concern that Scott, you had pointed out is exactly why I think probably some of the miscommunication is that just because something is in a public record doesn't mean it will be disclosed as public. So, and that is kind of hard to, we have public record and then, well, the stuff inside of the public record is also a record. So that's a little confusing, but really kind of look at the actual information and apply the exemption to the information, and that's going to get you most of the way, if not all the way. So don't stress, just apply the exemptions and you'll be okay.
Good advice. I see Elise has a hand up, and I will just add to that too. We get the same, and I'll click back, the same concern about the term public data, where agencies will sometimes say like, oh, now you're asking us to make all of our data public. That is not the ask. It is like the data being public after going through, a set of steps to protect people's privacy and so on. So
yep.
That's it. Elise, you had a comment, and I don't know if part of that was going to be distinguishing between data and a record, but that would be helpful if you wished.
Yeah, kind of building off of something that we actually always educate about is the difference between a public record and publicly available or accessible. That's a huge confusion for when people are talking about records retention. Our office has different, we don't really even have exemptions like FOI does. We have a lot more of a broad, what people have to follow for us covers way more than what is accessible through an FOI request. We even cover some groups that like do or don't have FOI. It's really complex, but our exemption is more which there's the official record, a duplicate record, or a non-record. So the only time you don't have to worry about like requesting authorization to destroy a record is if it's not a record. So if you think about anything that could be under FOI, exempt or otherwise, you have to follow our requirements. So a public record for us is not just publicly accessible. It's anything documenting the public's business. So anything confidential, anything like that, you still have to follow our, area. I haven't been a part of this advisory board, so I'm not sure of exactly the scope of what you need our information for. But I think something that I would just keep in mind is I see the crossover between, the open data versus FOI publicly available. But I want to caution everyone to not forget that just because it doesn't fall under open, you can't just get rid of it. So when you're working with agencies on what is being stored as the open data versus what is being kept securely, just make sure they understand that they can't just dispose of that data or record. They still need to work through our policies, which we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of record series that tell you how long to keep each of these kinds of records. They're all format neutral, so it does not matter if it is that data in the database, if it is a printed file, anything like that. It all has the same retention if the content is the same. So that's a big thing, is what the record is based about content. So you could have a text message and an email or a file, and if they all are related to that same subject matter, they have the same retention. So you could have theoretically a text message that has a permanent retention. So please, we try to caution people against using those transitory tools for record keeping and decision making because it's so complex to maintain them. And nobody wants to have to dig through a phone for getting, a records request. But we have a lot of guidance on how to maintain your records and what to do with them. So we're definitely a resource available for any of these kinds of questions. But there's a lot involved, and I just want to, we have a lot of overlap with FOIC, but we also have our own, unique aspects that we touch upon and train upon. So we both bring some different thoughts to the table on what needs to be done with these records. So here for any questions, but that's my initial spiel.
That's helpful. Let me see if there's questions, and I will say to both Nick, Annalise, personally, and FOIC and State Library staff have been wonderful resources. We brought both in for sort of training to agencies to understand the sort of different but related requirements here. And so it's been great to have an open door on both of those. And we just want to make sure we're factoring in what we need to for the future. I'm going to go, just in the interest of time, we'll see if there's other questions, and then to ask to the board members. We list out a few other terms here. Are there other terms that you see used that are sources of concern or confusion that we should be in some fashion trying to, provide some better kind of consistent guidance on? I'm thinking, just putting something up on a web page or pointers to like, here's the definition for this, that something folks could go back to and understand, here's what it actually says. If it's something that there's kind of more folklore around than what the actual statutory definitions are, if there is one. Sometimes there's not. Any other terms from the board members that you believe we should be focusing on? Elise, you have a hand up. Okay.
Yes, I forgot to add, but you have your data officers at all the agencies. We have records management liaison officers at all of the agencies, and they're actually a lot more broad than the data officers. Even I have a lot more that I have to work with, but I think that they would be a good resource when you're working with the respective agencies to loop them in, because they have a lot of knowledge and information about the management of the records. And I think if you're doing things with the data, then they would, it'd be good for them to know what's happening with the records as well, because they have their own, management of it. And I would hate for there to be a conflict of, they think they're disposing of something that's actually still existing, or vice versa. So I think looping the RMLOs in would be a great idea. And I have, all that information if anybody needs to know an agency's records officer. So I just wanted to add that information in.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good reference, and we've tried to make sure people know who their RMLO is. Although, again, your scope is larger than just the executive branch. Joe, you have a hand up.
Yeah, just terminology wise, I don't know how expansive you're calling like confidential information. Like some of the branch data is actually statutorily sealed. And it may use the term like erased, and we use terminology like that. And I don't know if the scope of confidential is falling in that, or you have another category where there's actually data that's statutorily sealed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we can follow up sort of afterwards, but if there's something that I think that probably applies mostly to judicial branch. I don't know if there's other cases, but if there's a definition or a place that you're using for that, that's helpful. Again, just to provide clarity for people, like here's where this term is used, here's where it comes up, here's what it doesn't say. That's helpful.
Yeah, Connecticut General Statutes 54-142 is an example of where data lies where it's not available to the public. And it actually is, it says it's not available to the public.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to plug my power cord in, and then I see Nick and Thad also have hands up. So.
Yeah, so I actually just wanted to follow up on what was just said. I think, that's the really important part. I think kind of, if I'm hearing you correctly, really what's being discussed is the erasure statute, and that's something that we get not infrequently at the commission, and most of the time we're saying, well, this is outside our jurisdiction to look at. We can't, the statute says, I'm not sure if this is the exact language, but effectively it says this isn't public information. And so, or it says it's not exempt on, or it's not available under the FOI Act 1-210 et sec. So, kind of looking for that language in those other statutes is really going to be where it's going to be most useful to say, hey, this isn't a public record, or it's covered under that provision of 1-210A. So just things to keep in mind for I don't necessarily think there's a conflict there, and that's kind of I think probably why 1-210A was incorporated, because you're never going to catch everything in 1-210B, and instead of just amending 1-210B a bunch of times, you have 1-210A that can kind of have a catch-all there. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask for the board members who are citing a lot of statutes, if you can send those over after. Your humble servants here would appreciate that. It's hard for me to take notes that quickly. Thad, and then Elise.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. One of the terms that we use here within the organization is critically sensitive data. So it's not necessarily confidential. It's not necessarily personal, but it is critically sensitive in some nature. And so it does have an elevated level of protection in terms of releasability, if you will. So just want to bring that up for discussion as well, that there's information that falls outside of these bounds as well. As I said, critically protected. So information you may not want to publicly put on a billboard alongside I-84, but information that if is, critical to a court case or something like that can be referenced or can be utilized, but it's not something that we're going to, as I said, put on a billboard on the side of 84.
That's helpful. Thanks, Thad. I will add too, one thing we have to do as a state is update our data classification standards. We've done that, and we'll cover this sort of indirectly. We've done that for the state longitudinal data system, but we need the enterprise ones updated, and that's where we're also using similar terms, confidential, restricted, sensitive, in those standards that probably need a review in conjunction with some of these terms. I see Elise and then John.
And regarding the confidential or erased records, from a records retention standpoint, the erased records are still subject to our policies. So they are not publicly accessible, but as far as for our purposes, they are still a public record in the sense that you still need authorization to dispose. We have actually guidance about that on how or when those may be destroyed. Because they are erased, they have a shorter retention than they would have if they had not been erased, but they are still under our policies, and this goes for other confidential things as well. I believe we have restricted records stored in the state archives that no one can actually look at, but they're permanent records, which I find kind of interesting, but they are still being retained even though they are fully restricted and no one can look at them. So it's a really interesting a crossover of what falls under us versus what is under FOI and what you have to keep even though nobody can look at it. So I just it is interesting, but just want to make sure that's clear and understood, that no matter the level of confidentiality, erasure, nulled records, all of that, they are still subject to our policies.
You've piqued my curiosity about the restricted records that no one can see, but we can talk about that later. John, you have a hand up.
I just wanted to jump in with respect to the various definitions. Obviously, just from the conversation here, it can get very complicated very quickly because of how statutes have grown and how privacy and public records laws have progressed. So just keep in mind at all times that your data or your information may fall under multiple categories. It could, for example, an element of a record might have to be sealed under judicial's requirements, but then there's elements of it that are still with the agency that could be subject to a public records request and be available through that forum. So to me, one of the key things is data versus information. Data is the little elements that are in that structured box, and then once it's aggregated, it becomes information. And the reason I say that is some of the legal definitions, if you have 2 different or 3 or more data elements, until they become information, they don't fall under the statute. So you can get a weird world where you can get data and data fields from one part, different reasons for different purposes. Somebody on the outside could aggregate it and create the information that's designed to be protected, and then it's not actually protected. So being cognizant of that. So it's not just the statute, the rule, the reg, the contract, whatever it may be, but the aggregation of it. For me, for confidential information, I also want to point folks to 4E-70, which is the state contracting statute that allows agencies to define confidential information. And that's particularly important for us in privacy and data security at the AG's office, because it then, anything the agency defines then becomes personal information for the purposes of our data breach notification statute, even if it's not statutory. So if you are an agency and you define, for example, I love using the example of the SNAP benefits number. So that's confidential information for DSS, but if somebody has it, it's not necessarily a statutory breach. It is, however, a breach under the contract that mirrors it. So this is all my pitch for, understanding and identifying your data, having your data structures so that you can map it to your retention schedules, your statutory obligations, your regulatory obligations, your agency policies. So whether you're on the privacy side, the public record side, it's one of those few areas where both sides of the coin, having proper structures in place with proper mapping, does wonderful things all across the board.
Yeah, thank you. I think hopefully it speaks to the value of doing some of the things that agencies are required to do, inventory data, classify data, sort of list out the ownership stewardship for that, which is not everybody's favorite activity, but it's very important for the reasons we're talking about here. Nick, you have a hand up.
Sorry, I just kind of wanted to jump a little bit off that, and I understand you can statute allows you to identify what's confidential, but there in the FOI Act there is a provision that essentially says you can't contract away the public's right to know or the public's right to information. So when you're making those contracts, that's a big part of it. Don't say something's going to be confidential unless if it's otherwise defined as a public record or within or subject to public disclosure under the FOI Act or some other statute, or unless it's exempt under some other statute. But yeah, that was just a big thing I wanted to make sure that I don't want to dig too much deep into it, but that's a really important part, because if the statute expressly says can't enter into a contract, that would essentially violate the FOI Act. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, perfect example there where the definition is confidential information as defined by the agency, but might not actually be confidential for the purposes of public records.
That's helpful. These are good examples. And a richer discussion than maybe I was anticipating. So we're a little behind on time. I'm going to switch the agenda around slightly just because we have some guests here who I'm going to allow to depart when they're in a timely-ish fashion. So again, we'll take some of the notes from this. If you cited something or like a policy or statute that you want to flag, I would sort of appreciate like just a list by email afterwards. That'll help pull some of this together. And again, we're just trying to think, what do we do with the fact that we've got some of these terms that get used but not necessarily defined clearly, and provide some clarity on that for the next state data plan. All right, so this is the timeline. So as we said at the beginning, we have a 2-year state data plan. This fall into winter, we'll be developing the next 2-year plan. I'm going to pull up, this is the time frame that we had for the last plan. And so again, unless board members advise otherwise, we're going to keep something basically similar to this. So working backwards, I'm required to develop a plan, submit it to this board by the end of the calendar year, December 31st, 2026. And then prior to that, I have to submit a draft of the plan by November 1st to the board, and then the board holds a public hearing on any aspects of the plan between November 1st and December 31st at some point to be determined. So kind of working backwards, the plan has to be done by the end of year. A draft of it has to be ready by November. There's required consultation with the agencies and with the executive leadership of the agencies. And so we try and build that in between sort of July, August, and November so that the inputs from the agencies get factored into the plan development. Last time we did surveys to agencies, we did surveys to agency leadership, brought folks together to kind of hear their different priorities, and we had very good public outreach in large part through the Data Collaborative and Michelle's work there to get out to data users in the state that we don't have a great sort of like line into. And so we got good engagement from a wide range of stakeholders from basically like summer into fall, November, so that that goes into that first draft. We hold a hearing and then finalize the plan by end of the calendar year. So unless there's kind of any advice to do otherwise, we're hopefully going to stick to something similar to this timeline for the next year. And so I want to encourage members to start thinking about topics or priorities or things that you think we should be attending to in the next round of the plan. All right. So I'm gonna go in a slightly different order, unless anybody objects. We're going to go through some of the goals that were in the current state data plan. You're seeing all the exciting slides that you're going to miss currently. We're going to go talk about one on job classes, and then we'll go back to the ones that we just skipped a second ago. So one of the things that we wanted to focus on the state data plan based on a lot of feedback from agencies and also sort of professionals that are interested in this kind of work in the state was to look at the way the state attracts and retains talent into data analytics, GIS jobs around the state. The public sector hiring works that people are slotted into job classes. The job classes that we have for those roles haven't been, kind of touched in some time. And so we wanted to undertake a review of the job classes, look at areas where we could improve those. And as part of that, we were able to bring in some experts from U.S. Digital Response, who I will yield the floor to momentarily for anything that they want to cover here. But U.S. Digital Response, which I think Keith is on the call, hopefully still can describe, but they're volunteers who've got expertise in particular areas, and they have a sort of a focus in this area, and so they've been kind of learning about the concerns in state of Connecticut with our job classes and advising on ways that we can improve that, and have done a wonderful job of that, all voluntary, over the past several months. And so Keith and I think David is here, and I don't know if there's anybody else, but Keith or David, if you want to cover sort of the work you've been doing and where things stand and anything you've learned from that, and we'll open it up again for questions or feedback from the board members after that. That would be great. All right.
Thank you, Scott. David Backrack with U.S. Digital Response. U.S. Digital Response, we try to promote trust in local and state governments to help your communities thrive. We were really pleased to be invited in to help the state of Connecticut to modernize some of its job classifications. It's such a pleasure to be here with people who love data the way that you all are clearly loving data. You need a workforce that is able to, that is qualified to work with data, that's excited to work with data. You need that workforce to be compensated properly. So we've been working with Scott and DAS and many, many other stakeholders. We've been doing benchmarking with neighboring states and other states that aren't neighboring. How do they design their data scientist job categories? How can we get GIS occupation built into the data scientist job classification? How can we create a ladder or a career range so that people can come in, learn data, and also stay in the data field over time? We're reaching the end of our engagement with the state on this. We see a lot of progress, and we're hoping that the output of this is that you have a multi-tiered data scientist occupation that is responsive to the market and competitive with data scientists' compensation, both in the private and public sectors.
Hey there, this is Keith Wilson from U.S. Digital Response. Just wanted to add in, I'm the USDR staff member working on this particular engagement, and David and the rest of the expert volunteer teams. Like, one of the things that's really kind of special about a project like this is that David has an extensive background working on government job classifications. We also brought in folks that have specific industry experience and subject matter expertise in data and GIS. So they have kind of not only their own industry experience and knowledge of that, but the ability to sort of understand the unique challenges and opportunities within the state of Connecticut. And just wanted to just offer that out. We focus on a variety of different areas at U.S. Digital Response, but we tailor teams that are specific to your needs. And there, to be honest, there are not a lot of folks out there that have the level of specific job classification experience as David. So really lucky to have folks like him and the other folks on the project as well. And Scott's been a fantastic partner along the way.
All right, thank you, Keith. David, I forgot to shout out our also our UConn School of Public Policy intern, Vanessa Reinecke, who worked a lot on this and graduated about a month ago, so she is not here anymore. We'll open up for feedback questions from the board members. In a second, David, how many job classifications have you read in your professional career?
I mean, it might be 100,000 different jobs across more than 50 agencies. So I guess I'm thankful that my glasses are not thicker than they are at this point.
Thank you. I just wanted you to say that in front of all these people. So excellent. I appreciate it. And ours are now the best. That's what I'm going to assume is the case. All right, that and then John.
So thank you, Scott. As the resident GIS practitioner and professional on the board, I want to applaud the state for taking a look at this. I think it's important to recognize that GIS is kind of unique in the sense that it has such a diverse level of application across so many diverse fields that pigeonholing it into any one field, I think, is kind of short-sighted, and not to pun, but being able to take a wider look at GIS and folks who practice GIS for the state in various offices and divisions and departments across the state umbrella as data scientists, I think is critical and important. So I just want to applaud the state and thank David and Keith both for taking a look at this for us and providing the state with the insight and the information and advisement, if you will, to provide a much more appropriate job title, if you will, for the folks who are doing this important work for the state.
I see John has a hand up, and I will also add too that in addition to David and Keith, there's 3 other members of the digital response team who just could not make the meeting today: Tanya Peterson, Danielle Martinez, and Andrea Levy. All have been wonderful and who have real sort of expertise in this area that we've been able to draw on, and they're all doing it as volunteers. So I appreciate that. John.
I'll echo everything Thad said. This is obviously very timely and long overdue. For David or Keith, as part of the project, are the job classifications being reviewed not just for the purposes of agency roles, but also the activities agencies do? And I'm thinking specifically of the role of technologists akin to the FTC, CFPB, or other federal agencies. On our side, we use investigators and other folks, and we have a lot of contracts with outside technical expertise, but are looking to develop a specific technologist role.
Keith, I'll take a crack at it. If I understand the question, I'll give an answer. You'll tell me if it is responsive, please. We've put a lot of effort into designing the data scientist occupation, which already exists. So we're refining it. We want it to be agnostic of the subject matter, so that it's the skill set and the knowledge associated with data specifically, and not related to transportation or child welfare or economics, but the data specifically. When we got to a certain point with developing the occupation, we saw that we had too many similarities to existing other occupations to include some of the technology, the IT area or the GIS area or the research area. So the last couple of weeks, we've been putting particular effort on making it distinct from other areas so that we can make it more easily understood and more obviously applicable to all data. Now, to the extent I missed the part of the question. Could you re-ask that part?
Sure. Yeah. And for, obviously there's multiple purposes for agencies. In the AG's office, we would use them for investigations and enforcement, particularly around the Connecticut Data Privacy Act. So we're looking to develop that. Is the plan basically just to tier the data scientists? And how did you look at research analyst? And you're going to parallel that or incorporate research analyst?
Yes, that was one of the ones we wanted in particular to not overlap with, because the more you overlap, the more difficult it is to understand why you would use one or the other. And also if they're compensated differently, which we don't know yet, we would have to have a better explanation for why and how. So we took a one-tier occupation, and it looks like the state is going to make it 4 or 5 tiers, from junior up to more senior, something that parallels something like the research analyst, which also is tiered, and culminates in a supervisory role if that is appropriate for somebody's career progression. So we've tiered it, and we've also scoped it to be more self-contained, more distinct from others. We also understood that GIS specifically is an occupation, or it's a job category that's not really used at the technical level. And we looked at why that was, and we tried to make this to be inclusive of it, so that GIS has a home if it's deemed appropriate.
Thanks.
I'll add 2 kind of quick comments in, and we'll see if there's other comments, questions from the board members here. One is that this work is not done in kind of 2 different ways. The initial focus was changes to the data scientist role. That was really the pain point that we heard from agencies, that the way that was developed, it sort of didn't meet the needs to attract and retain talent. That's what we wanted to focus on. And so that was the first thing to focus on. That's still sort of under review, the changes to that with state HR, and there's a long process to kind of get that concluded. When that's done, also, there probably will be more changes that we'll have to look at for some of the other job classes that are out there. And I think, John, some of the things that you're bringing up, and even the discussion that we just had in the prior session, opens up some of the areas where to work with data in this day and age, having some understanding of, policy, the law is pretty critical. And those are, maybe not fully incorporated into the data scientist series, but those are going to be things that it's valuable to have people understand more and more in the future. So anyway, this isn't done. Unfortunately for us, both our engagement with Vanessa as the intern, and then the digital response team will end soon, but it'll take a long time to sort of have these changes get put into place. And again, once that happens, hopefully if the board members have those other places that you think we should be focusing on, then we're going to make sure we're attending to that and trying to keep this going. So we've been able to have success so far getting some of these changes, which has been good, at least to the point where they can get sort of circulated and reviewed with agencies, but there's more work to be done. Any other comments, questions, feedback from board members? Seeing and hearing nothing. I think I'm going to thank David and Keith in multiple ways for presenting and doing this work, which has taken a lot of effort, and then took them deep into the bowels of state of Connecticut hiring practices and job classifications. But again, I think it's going to bear fruit, hopefully relatively soon. We are going to go back through the slide deck here and cover some of the topics that I just skipped. And I'm going to momentarily, I will introduce and then turn the microphone over to Matt Hono, who joined 2 or 3 weeks ago as open data analyst at OPM. So I think one of the things that the state data plan focuses on is transparency, open data. We had staff turnover and a longish time that we were understaffed in this area, and so some of the things that we're hoping to make progress on did not make as much progress on for the state data plan. But Matt, who can introduce himself, in a second. Joined, he's got great experience sort of working on these topics, has experience both some at OPM, some working with folks in the criminal justice area. And so he is joined, kind of getting up to speed with some of the work there. And we're going to talk quickly. Matt will introduce himself and talk quickly about the open data access plans, which is something that the board heard about last year. And again, went a little bit on the back burner, but will now get put back on the front burner to hopefully complete by the end of this year. Matt.
Cool. Thank you so much, Scott. Yeah, really happy to be here. So yeah, just to briefly introduce myself again. Yeah, I'm Matt Hono. I'm the new Open Data Research Analyst. I'm taking over a lot of the responsibilities that Augusta and Pauline left off. And as Scott mentioned, I was the UConn School of Public Policy intern at OPM last year, and I also spent the last year at UConn's Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy, where I worked on various criminal justice policy research projects. Good to see you again, Joe. So I'm really happy to be here and meet all of you. So as you know, each executive branch agency is required to develop open data. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, so as you guys know, each executive branch agency is required to develop open data access plans. And as a reminder, I put the statute here, and I'm just going to read it quickly. Each executive branch agency shall develop an open data access plan. Such plan will be in a form prescribed by the Office of Policy Management and shall detail the agency's plan to publish as open data any public data that the agency has identified and any protected data that could be made public through aggregation, redaction, or redaction of individually identified information or other means sufficient to satisfy applicable state or federal law or regulation. So a lot of words, but pretty much working to kind of promote open data and kind of making a plan to promote open data in the state. Could you do the next slide? So yeah, in 2019, a version of these plans were created, but in a limited capacity, where a lot of the plans were more of just like an inventory of assets rather than like an actual plan to kind of encourage open data. So as Scott mentioned, there's been a bit of staff turnover and onboarding time. So the timeline that I think has been previously shared at these meetings is a little bit out to date. So on the slide now is the new timeline for the project. And really the main change from the previous iterations of the timeline is that the publication goal of these plans is pushed to September of 2026. And as you can see in the slide, basically the structure of the timeline is broken into 4 phases. So at the start there, right, it's brainstorming, meeting with brainstorming, and then it goes into meeting with each agency's agency data officer to discuss the open data priorities, goals, and questions. And then it goes into documenting the data goals. And then after all the goals are documented, we're planning on going through and following up with the agencies on the progress achieving these goals. So first off, the process for this originally started in June of 2025, and the meetings wrapped up around December of 2025. And currently, we're in the phase of working with the agencies to document their open data goals. Regarding those goals, can we do the next slide? So briefly, these are the goals, right? This is the structure of the goals. So it really simply asks the agencies to describe an open data access goal, which could be things like improving metadata, increasing automation, or just simply posting more data to the portal. And it really also just asks briefly for the agency to describe what their overall strategy and approach would be to complete said goal. And we wanted to make this kind of a little bit not of a super heavy lift for the agencies and kind of make it more of a just helpful brainstorming process about how they could be a little bit more transparent in their work. So if you, next slide. And this really just goes through and just gives you a structure of what the current scope of the document is. And basically what I'm doing so far is I'm in the process of reviewing all the notes that we're taking from the numerous meetings with the agency data officers, which again took place from August 2025 to December 2025, and the goals that have been drafted so far. Based on what has been drafted, I feel like I found like 3 buckets of agencies, right? So some agencies have submitted really excellent, very specific goals and have a really well thought out approach to how to achieve them. Some of them have submitted goals where there's a little bit more clarification is needed, and then some have submitted none so far. So I'm just working on creating specific follow-up messages with each ADO in the coming week, depending on the status of what goals that they have submitted, and if they need any more, if we need any more information to fully understand how we can help them achieve said goals. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I'm hoping having this plan and this document completed by September of this year, after a little bit of delay due to the staff turnover. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Let's see if there's questions, comments from board members here. And again, this is critical for sort of the first 2 goals in the state data plan, both of which are about improving metadata and making it easier for our resources to be accessed and navigated by data users, whether they're from agencies or otherwise. And so the plan sort of underpins that, but when, again, a little bit on the back burner during staff transition, on the front burner now. All right. Seeing no hands, thank you. And for those of you from the agencies and from the other board members, please welcome Matt in when you interact with him in the future. I will go. I think we have 2 other things we're going to try and cover in the next 8 minutes. So this will be a little bit lightning round. One of the other areas that really agencies encouraged us to focus on was making it easier for agencies to share data with one another, and an underpinning for that was having a secure way to do that. And so we've spent a large portion of the last 1.5 years working on developing sort of the technical aspects to support enterprise data sharing. I think we have some of the legal and the governance pieces covered already, but our sort of next thing in the roadmap was looking at the actual technical underpinnings for that. And so we're working on development of a secure data enclave, and Adriana or Katie, I believe, are going to cover this in a brief fashion. So I will turn over the microphone.
Thanks, Scott. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I see some nodding. Thank you. For those who don't know me, I am Adriana Sanchez Dominici. I am the project manager for the Secure Data Enclave. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. The updates are pretty quick, but exciting. So what we're looking at here is the original board resolution from the executive board for DataLink CT. That basically authorized OPM and the rest of the DataLink CT sort of group to go on this journey to find a solution that was going to create space for us to safely manage, track, and make data available for DataLink CT data requests. There's more detail on the slide here that basically sort of outline what we went through to get the enclave sort of where it is today. And this was really sort of what served as the preliminary requirements, if you will, for the project. So if you want to flip one, Scott. So the board resolution was approved in June of 2024. In June of this year, which is this month, we are officially launching the Secure Data Enclave. This has been a 2-year journey, maybe longer than that, because some of the prep work started even before my time with the state. We kind of kicked off the project a little bit more formally in January of last year. And for those who are less familiar with the Secure Data Enclave project, essentially what the Enclave is a secure environment that's meant to centralize, protect, and manage the sensitive data for DataLink CT requests, essentially that are serving to allow for requesters to do their research and support policy analysis across the state. So DataLink CT is the state's longitudinal data system that's been around for some time. And really, this is just a step in the direction of sort of modernizing some of the infrastructure for the data that is being used in these requests. Like we were talking about earlier, a lot of the data that is used for data request contains personal information. It's sensitive data that the agencies are sort of trusting DataLink CT with. So we are on a journey to make sure that we're always increasing the security, safety, and privacy of that data. And that's what the Enclave is here to do. Just flip one more, Scott, if you could. These are some of the goals that we have now post-launch, because even though the environment is up and running, there are still things that need to be done just to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and properly communicating with our partners, making sure that documentation is clear. Our onboarding and processes will have to sort of be updated. Other items that DataLink CT will start to look into now that we have the environment that is safe is looking at research-ready data sets. That's questions that come from the agency side, because it's a lot of effort to get these data sets prepared for each data request. And sometimes the questions are sort of similar or similar enough that making data sets sort of pre-ready and storing them in an environment like the Enclave is something that they're interested in. Similarly, developing a process for persistent linked identifiers. We talked a little bit about like privacy and security earlier today, making sure that we're doing this in a way that's safe and secure. And then always exploring opportunities for making the environment better, cloud storage and security, and those kinds of things. I think I just have one more slide, Scott. This is really just our thank you slide. Like I said, this has been quite a journey, and it's required a lot of involvement from a lot of different groups. There's public groups that aren't even called out here that we had to interface with. But namely, obviously the operating group for DataLink CT, our partners at the Department of Labor, which serve as Data Integration Hub. We have several sort of governing board, executive board members, and our partners at DAS BIT who have really worked as the muscle to kind of get the technical grounding for this environment. So we're really thankful for all of them. I think that's it from me. I will take questions or anything else.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. Let's see if there's questions or hands. I will also add, just to extend the gratitude that's expressed on this slide, Dave Labadia from BITS, I think it looks like he had to drop off the meeting, but we really intentionally insource this rather than outsourcing it. So it's developed really by state IT using the existing tools so that it's something that we can sustain and work with as a state. And that required a lot of involvement from a lot of people in state IT. And we're just grateful for the ability to coordinate and work effectively with them on this project. All right. Seeing no hands, unless somebody stops me, I'm going to go to the next slide and cover it in an extremely brief fashion, and then we will wrap up at 10:30. Great. Responsible use of AI. Everyone always wants to talk about AI. We're going to kick some of this to the next meeting, but to motivate it, again, this is what we covered. There we are. We covered during the legislative updates is a set of sort of what I think of as like paired requirements to kind of make state data AI ready in conjunction with developing the policies and procedures to make sure we do that in a safe and responsible way. So we have requirements to develop policies for data quality, data governance. Again, we've done, I think, in a similar vein, as we're just talking about for the Secure Data Enclave, we're incubating some of this in the complex environment for interagency data sharing that we have for DataLink CT. So we have a Secure Data Enclave that we'll hopefully be able to use in a broader fashion in the future. Katie Breslin's on the call as a data governance coordinator, developed the data quality policies, data governance policies for DataLink CT, data privacy policy for that. And so I think we're hoping that we can leverage some of the existing policies that were developed to make those sort of enterprise-wide policies, but we have to develop the policies to make sure that we know what's happening with our data when it sort of gets used through different types of AI solutions. For folks that want a motivation for this, there's a good study that was done through Urban Institute that we can try and find and send the link out for, where they went through and used several of the sort of existing generative AI solutions that are on the market. So they used ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera, and they asked them sort of like basic plain language questions that could be answered through government data, and they tested the accuracy of the results on it. And so they would ask, like, how many high school graduates, what's the unemployment rate? They would ask some sort of basic questions you should be able to get like a consistent, clear answer to, and they tested across models. And they got not consistent answers. They didn't get sort of accurate answers across a lot of those. And so that really, I think, is where when people are asking questions that could be answered with government data, we're going to make sure they're getting accurate answers through the AI solutions that are out there. They're not asking us to make sure that it's pulling in the right data. So the obligation's on us to make sure that we're pushing the data out to the rest of the world in a way that allows it to be interpreted accurately, both by the human public, but now more and more the AI solutions. So we'll send the Urban Institute study. It's a really nice example of like where government data has kind of a burden to make sure that we're presenting that accurately for these solutions as much as possible. And so that's the work that we'll be doing. This is due by January 1st, 2028 to put the policy framework and get the data sort of AI ready. So work on that will commence. And I think at the next board meeting in September, we can and should talk about that in more depth. Any last comments, questions from board members for today? Hearing nothing, then I don't think we formally opened it, so we don't need to make any motion or move to adjourn. But thank you, everybody, for the time. Thank you. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning. Thanks for your patience with this. Thanks for joining the meeting just before a long weekend, and just appreciate the engagement from everybody in this work, and we'll have more to do later this year as we develop a new plan. And so start thinking about things you want to see factored into the next 2-year plan. So thanks very much. You have a great day.